Good evening. Welcome to the November 10th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. Hope you enjoyed that video of about the holiday tree and the reminder to bring your ornaments. We could use some decoration on that. Those of us here in council chambers, please join the village council in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For those present in council chambers this evening, copies of tonight's agenda can be found on either side of the room. And for those watching at home, the agenda, as well as links to all the documentation we have here on the dais, can be found on our website at downers.us, where in the lower left-hand corner you can find a link titled Current Week's Meetings. Due to the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, public comment will continue to be taken electronically as well as here in council chambers. To submit a question or comment electronically, you can visit the same This Week's Meetings Village webpage and click on the green Submit Public Comment link anytime during our meeting. We will check periodically for new submissions. Megan, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Colavini?
Here.
Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Mayor Barnett?
Here. We are all here tonight. That's awesome. Good to see everybody. Item 3 on our agenda tonight concerns minutes of previous council meetings. Is there a motion?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the October 20th, 2020 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the council? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Item 4, just like that, we are on to the public comments section of our meeting. This is an opportunity for those here in attendance to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. So if you've got something on your mind, come on down to the podium and let us know.
Thanks for being here, everybody. I don't know if it's on the agenda. I didn't grab one on the side. So I was curious when you guys were going to get into some of the budget stuff.
We are going to touch on that in a little bit. It's on the agenda. And,
I can wait then.
yeah,
I can withhold the question until
but
you
by
guys
all
do it.
means, please jump in at that time.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, moving on. Item 5. Tonight's agenda is a public hearing. Find my public hearing notes. Uh-oh. I don't have the papers I need up here at the dais.
If it's on the link.
What's that?
It's on the link.
Help me.
If you hit the hyperlink.
Sorry, guys. Bear with me here. Good news is, those links we were talking about earlier are there for me as well. This is a public budget hearing for our 2021 budget. This public hearing will come to order. This public hearing has been called by the Village Council to consider the proposed village budget. Notice of this hearing was published in the Enterprise Newspapers, Inc., otherwise known as the Bugle, on October 28th, and a certificate of publication is made part of these proceedings. I'd like to summarize the procedures we will follow for tonight's public hearing. First, Mike Baker, Deputy Village Manager, will provide an overview of the proposed budget. Next, there will be an opportunity for members of the Village Council to ask questions or make comments. Then there will be an opportunity for members of the public to make statements or comments, or to submit written statements for comments for the record. I'll then ask any council member who wishes to make a statement or ask questions, and after that, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn. At this hearing, witnesses will not be sworn, and a verbatim written transcript of the statements or testimony given at the hearing will not be prepared. However, recording of the procedures will be made on village equipment and retained until minutes of the hearing have been prepared and approved by the Village Council. With that, Mr. Baker.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. The municipal budget is the village's annual implementation plan of its mission and strategic goals. The purpose of the budget is to align everyday operations and resources with community priorities outlined in planning documents such as the long-range plan and the comprehensive plan. This is the staff presentation of the proposed FY21 budget. it is intended to provide a general overview. There will be several meetings in November and December to address issues in greater detail. The presentation will focus on the budget review and approval schedule and a summary of key points. The budget review process provides ample opportunity for dialogue among community members, the village council, and staff in a series of public meetings. The budget review and approval process usually includes a Saturday coffee with the council meeting where residents are invited to discuss the proposed budget. But due to the ongoing pandemic and extra mitigation efforts that will be in place very shortly, this meeting will not take place. Residents wishing to address the council on any particular budget item or issue may do so by participating in a scheduled budget meeting, as shown on the screen above, or participating remotely by using the Remarks public comment tool. There are 9 key points in the proposed FY21 budget as found in the manager's budget message. This presentation will include more detail on each of these 9 key points, which include, number 1, uncertain revenue performance due to economic uncertainty. Number 2, this is a budget that follows the recommendations of the long-range plan. Number 3, it addresses the financial gap in the general fund. Number 4, discussion about the plan for filling existing vacant positions. Number 5, the property tax levy increase that's required for public safety pensions. Point number 6, a $22.3 million investment in infrastructure. Point number 7, planned retirement of the downtown TIF. 8, funding for priority action items. And number 9, an active and responsive implementation to the budget. So the remainder of this presentation will touch on each one of those key points. Many of the village's revenue sources across multiple funds are dependent on the local economy's performance. The proposed FY21 budget was prepared with the economic effects of the pandemic still unfolding. The downturn in the economy, which started in March, is having a substantial negative impact on key revenues in 2020 and is likely to continue through 2021. Economic uncertainty results in a reduced ability to accurately forecast 2021 revenues. The proposed FY21 budget was prepared with great care and attention to detail, and reflects staff's best assessment of revenues. The budget assumes that revenues will perform similarly to the third quarter of 2020. However, actual revenues for 2021 may vary significantly from the budget. Staff and council have been discussing the uncertain revenue performance since April of this year. And here's a graph that the council has seen many times, showing the range of likely general fund revenue for both fiscal year 2020 and 2021. All right, a little bit about point number 2. The long-range plan includes recommendations to address a general fund financial gap of up to $8.3 million, the projected worst-case scenario. The recommendations, which are an extension of the 2020 COVID-19 financial response plan, are reflected in the proposed FY21 budget and are intended to position the village for future financial sustainability. The proposed FY21 budget is the implementation of a 21-month plan to respond to the economic impacts of the pandemic. Without implementation of the recommendations of the long-range plan, staff estimates that the general fund would have had a financial gap of approximately $4.8 million. Existing revenue sources are budgeted to generate $46.6 million, while expenses prior to any reduction efforts were projected to be $51.4 million. The proposed FY21 budget addresses the $4.8 million gap with the following actions, and they're shown in categories in the table on the screen. So category number 1 includes expense reductions of $2.3 million. Category number 2 includes revenue enhancements of $1 million by increasing the food and beverage tax by 0.5% effective March 1st, 2021, and increasing ambulance fees. And then category number 3 includes the use of $1.5 million in cash in the Major Buildings Fund. Let's review the proposed budget for the general fund. Revenues and expenses are budgeted to be $49.17 million. At first glance, this appears to be a balanced budget. However, revenues include the $1.5 million transfer into the general fund from the Major Buildings Fund. This is essentially using reserves, and therefore expenses exceed revenues by $1.5 million. Because money from the Major Buildings Fund will be used as reserves, the general fund reserves are not budgeted to be used and should remain at the recommended levels with a balance of $20.6 million. This graph shows the total revenue in the general fund from 2016 to 2021. If you look over to the far right, you can see the $49.17 million that is budgeted for revenues in 2021. Revenues are up by 2.8% over the FY 2020 year-end estimate. This increase is driven primarily by 3 factors. Number 1, a $1.16 million increase in the public safety pension levy. Number 2, a $600,000 increase in revenue from the food and beverage tax, a rate increase of 0.5% effective on March 1st. And point number 3, a $400,000 increase in ambulance fee revenue, which is an increase and restructuring to bring Downers Grove's fees in line with DuPage County's typical fees. And now some information on general fund expenses. The graph shows the general fund expenses over time from 2016 to 2021. Budget expenses are $49.17 million, an increase of 2.8% over the FY20 year-end estimate. This increase is driven primarily by, again, the $1.16 million increase in the required contribution to public safety pensions and a $740,000 increase in personnel expenses. Key expense reductions include a $535,000 reduction in risk fund expenses and keeping existing vacant positions unfilled for 6 months or 1 year. Which brings us to point number 4, the plan for filling existing vacant positions. Total staffing levels will be reduced by 1 full-time equivalent, or FTE, with the elimination of the customer service specialist position in the water fund. This brings the village's total FTE count down to 303.4, which is 71 lower than it was in 2008. The budget calls for 1 currently vacant firefighter paramedic position to remain vacant for the year and for 4 other positions to remain vacant for 6 months. The management analyst position can be changed to a social worker position if so directed by the village council after review and consideration of the Human Services Ad Hoc Committee report. The total municipal budget relies on several sources of revenue, but the property tax levy is one of the most significant funding sources. Property taxes account for approximately 30% of the general fund budget. The village's property tax levy consists of 5 components that support specific services and obligations of the village. The 2 most significant components of the levy are the levy for operations and the levy for pension obligations. The property tax levy for the proposed FY21 budget is $15.79 million. This is an increase of $1.16 million over the FY20 property tax levy. The increase is due solely to the levy for required public safety pension contributions. Per state law, the village is required to make a contribution to the pension funds in this amount. All other components of the property tax levy remain unchanged. You can see the village's portion of the tax bill shown here in orange. The village of Downers Grove represents under 10% of the typical property tax bill. In 2020, a typical resident with a property that has a market value of $350,000 paid $653.80 to the village. In 2021, the same residential property is expected to pay $705.45 in village property taxes, an increase of about $52. The proposed FY21 budget allows for continued substantial improvements in the village's infrastructure systems, even as many of the revenues which support capital projects continue to struggle. Several planned capital projects were deferred in 2020 due to the revenue uncertainty. Many of these deferred projects are planned to be constructed in 2021, in addition to the originally planned projects for 2021. The investment includes $6.7 million in streets, $5.1 million in stormwater, and $4.7 million for water. The improvements are designed to reduce the total life cycle cost of owning and operating the village's infrastructure systems. This graph shows infrastructure investment by system. The proposed FY21 budget includes $270,000 for sidewalk maintenance and repair, $500,000 for Ogden Avenue sidewalks, $845,000 for crosswalk and accessibility improvements, and $165,000 for the Jefferson Brookbank sidewalk connection. It also includes $220,000 for construction of additional sidewalks near elementary schools. Staff plans on preparing a plan for this project in the first half of 2021. The proposed FY21 budget also includes $220,000 in the general and capital projects funds for the installation of parkway trees. Approximately 620 trees are planned to be planted in 2021. This is a significant increase in tree planting to make up for the smaller number of trees planted in this year as the spring plantings were deferred. All right, number 7. After 23 years, the Downtown Tax Increment Financing, or TIF district, is scheduled to retire. In fiscal year 2021 will be the final year of revenue generated by the TIF, and the final debt service payment will also be made next year. Projections show that the budgeted revenue is sufficient to fully pay the remaining debt service payments. This represents the culmination of a successful TIF district that has added tremendous value and vitality to downtown Downers Grove. The TIF was able to weather the Great Recession, which caused a substantial drop in property values. But over the past 6 years, strong growth has generated the revenue necessary to meet all of the outstanding debt obligations. And next year, at the appropriate time, we'll look for opportunities to celebrate the successful conclusion of the downtown TIF. The village is currently working on 9 priority action items. The proposed FY21 budget includes sufficient funding to complete these items. The general fund includes $40,000 to complete the review diversity, equity, and inclusion practices item. The capital projects fund includes $2.1 million for replacement of the enterprise resource planning system. A total of $135,000 is included in multiple funds for the implementation of the high school pedestrian safety recommendations. Other priority action items can be completed by staff within the existing general fund budget for 2021. And finally, point number 9. In the same manner that fiscal year 2020 the budget was actively implemented in response to rapid changing financial circumstances due to the pandemic, the fiscal year 2021 budget will be actively implemented and responsive to actual revenue performance. Staff will monitor revenues and expenses on an ongoing basis and will provide monthly reports to the Village Council. Informal adjustments to the budget will likely be made as revenue performance becomes known. If revenues recover strongly and exceed budgeted amounts, such that the expense reduction efforts can be eased, a mid-year amendment to the fiscal year 21 budget may be appropriate. That concludes our presentation for the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. I will turn things back over to Mayor Barnett for comments and questions.
Thanks, Mike. Item 2 on our public hearing is questions or comments from the village council. Do we have questions or comments from village council? Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to thank staff for all the work that goes into this. The Village of Downers Grove has won a number of budget awards over the years. If we win another one, it's going to be incredibly well earned because this has been one heck of a year. 2020's budget didn't end up going quite the way we thought it would, and it's leading to a lot of changes in what we're seeing here compared to what we would like to see. But the important part is that we're able to use the cash on hand that we've got. I hesitate to call reserves because that's a technical term. It's loaded. And we're increasing revenue where we are doing so in what I think is the least impactful way on our residents. And also controlling costs by holding vacancies open and taking all the other measures we can. And we're doing it while also investing in our infrastructure, which is very important. We put a lot of things off during 2020, and rightfully so, but these are things that we can delay, but we can't delay for too long. It's important that we maintain the streets and sidewalks and all of our other infrastructure on a schedule, because if we don't, it costs much more in the future. We'd rather pay less and pay it now. So I support the budget as it stands. I look forward to voting for it come December, and I applaud the staff for all their work and continued investment in the community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else? Rich?
Yeah, I'd like to add to Commissioner Jose's comments. Thank you, Mike Baker, Judy Butney, and the budget staff for all the hard work you've done. This was a tough year, and we've weathered this storm pretty well. Hopefully the storm will subside as opposed to increasing, but I think our organization is well suited to deal with that as we need to. It's interesting to me that we're still able to move forward with our priority action items and the infrastructure improvements. You can only delay those so long, and then they cost a lot more. So that's why we have to do that. I do have one question. Based on our ratios and our previous experience, are we likely to be able to retain our AAA bond rating? And then how often do they rate us?
We'll start with how often do they rate us. We usually get a financial rating when we do a planned bond issuance or any type of restructuring or refinancing of existing debt. We don't have any planned for FY21. However, if an opportunity presents itself to take advantage of low interest rates and refinancing of existing debt, we will pursue it, which could lead to a re-rating. We expect that with this budget we will retain our AAA bond rating. We watch carefully the indicators that they look for when they give us that rating, and maintaining proper reserves is a big portion of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Other council questions? Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mayor. Just had a couple of quick questions. Again, echoing the sentiments of the other commissioners. When you look at the budget, it's amazing what it looks like when you go through it line by line. And for residents that may not be familiar with the process, just really would encourage individuals, if you have the time, to take a look at, if not all of it, some of it. It really is a testament to what we do here. I just wanted to ask the village, when you look at the budget and kind of start combing through it, there are certain items in the budget that you can lock in and you can say, these move over easily to next year. Which of the items were outside of property taxes? Which were the items that were easiest for the village to kind of pencil in to say, hey, we can count on this? You know that hotel is up in the air and a lot of other areas, but what items helped shape the villages, something that they could actually put their, kind of cement some budget numbers in, for individuals that aren't familiar with the budget.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Gray. We have a variety of sources of revenues in many funds. So a lot of times folks may think only of property taxes, but there's so many revenue sources. Some of the revenue sources that are most stable are first and foremost property taxes. Even in the height of the pandemic, folks across Downers Grove and throughout DuPage County paid their property taxes, so that's a rock solid, very predictable revenue source for the village. After that, we learned that, frankly, motor fuel tax performs in a very steady manner, and the state had just increased the rate for the state's motor fuel tax, so that's performing in a steady manner. Ambulance fees tend to perform in a very steady manner. Other sources of revenues do not perform in a steady manner, and they change with the economic cycles. You mentioned hotel tax, food and beverage tax, sales tax, home rule sales tax, building permit fees, license fees, user fees. All of these tend to move up and down with economic cycles, which has been the challenge that Mr. Baker noted when we were trying to predict revenue sources. If residents want to see exactly how those revenues have been performing, you can click on one of the links in previous meetings labeled COVID-19 Financial Response Plan, and we have some easy-to-read graphs. Most of our revenue sources that I just mentioned have a V-shaped shape to them, where they drop precipitously in March and April and have been performing a lot better recently. And of course, the hotel tax, we're still waiting for the other leg of the U to form that have gone down significantly and stayed down. So if you like, we could get a more formal answer for you next week to give you some better understanding of which of those are more predictable. Thank you, Commissioner.
And then really quickly, the second one, will we get a better idea of the priority action item as we go through this process for the review of the diversity, equity, and inclusion practices?
Yes, and in that priority action item, it calls for one of the other ones to be completed first, and that's the one that's on the agenda tonight, the consideration of the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee report. Our schedule calls for us to look at the considered review of diversity, equity, and inclusion practices a couple months into 2021.
Thank you.
Any other council questions? Leslie, please.
I mean, first, again, echo everybody else. Thank you. I am always impressed at the budget put forth, but especially in COVID times, it is much more challenging. My question kind of goes along with Commissioner Gray, so I'm sure I won't get an answer tonight, but it is not necessarily which are more predictable sources of revenue, but kind of how did we, I know that Mike Baker mentioned that we considered Q3 a little bit in terms of where we saw some of those more unpredictable revenue sources. So things like hotel tax, I noticed, was up a little bit from this year. Home rule sales tax or building permits, we kind of dropped a little bit. So I was just curious as to the methodology of how we got to some of those. Were they all based on Q3, or were there other factors that were contributing to it?
It was primarily based on Q3. And it was based on the idea that the pandemic negative effects on the economy will likely be around for most, if not all, of 2021. And it seemed that the economy would still remain somewhat open. That was based on that assumption that it would not be a stay-at-home order for a majority or even a portion of 2021. That was the overriding set of assumptions, and we looked at that really reflected Q3 of this year. Other sources we looked to our partners at Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation and some of their board members and Mr. Casa to get their input on some trends and issues on revenues, and we also looked at the Illinois Municipal League, who helps us with projecting revenue. All that being said, that sounds very scientific. It really is our best guess. We think it's a good one, an informed one. We're also going to monitor like crazy and report on to you.
Thanks.
Anyone else in council? Are there any questions or comments from the audience? If so, please come on down to the podium.
Any desire to take this off while I talk to you guys?
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, the budget is very well done, very easy to understand, so you guys, thank you for that. I have been looking at the long-term plan. Do you guys all have copies of that up there somewhere? So on page, it starts on page 17 is where I'm of particular interest. So you guys are referring to a $1.16 million tax increase for the citizens. And so what I'm concerned about as I look on page 17 is you guys can see all the way back from 2009, it's probably about 1.25 in terms of village contribution, and I understand you guys are given this bag, you guys aren't making these rules, but I'm very concerned, as you can see, almost a doubling of our contributions as citizens, and our funding is down, or it's down compared to where it was in 2009. So the question for me is, where does that leave 1.16 for this year? I have 3 little kids, 2, 4, and 7, so I'm not planning on going anywhere for a while. So I'm more concerned about 2029 and 2039 and what those increases have to sustain in order to get some sort of funding of the pension.
So we can get you some of the drivers behind that. There is a state plan that's driving that, and we're unfortunately just responsive to it. In Downers, what we have done, certainly over the last, 20-plus years, is made a commitment that those costs, which are picked by somebody else, are going to be paid from property taxes. And what you're seeing is exactly right. They have outpaced every other revenue source. They've outpaced the cost of inflation. They've outpaced personal income levels. They've outpaced everything by a ton. It is, probably not for tonight's conversation, but arguably the single largest challenge the state of Illinois faces. But municipal government is in the business of hiring people. That's what we do. And the state determines what we're going to pay those folks in retirement, and we pay it. That's all there is to it. It's a lousy answer for you. 2029 should scare you. It absolutely should. It should scare everybody. But we are not going to get out of the business, because that's what we do, is provide services, and it's just people. I mean, you can see that budget as you break it down, the personnel costs. At the end of the day, that drives pensions. What we have done is tried our very best to be a lean organization. So you look at things like headcount, which ultimately funds future pension obligations, is way down over the last decade. We work very hard at partnering with other organizations. But at the end of the day, your observation is spot on, and what we're going to do about it is keep making those pension payments.
Yeah, I understood. I mean, again, you guys are doing what's required of you guys as the Village of Downers Grove. The question becomes, as you look at 2021 contract renegotiation time, are these conversations that are happening with those unions that are happening? That I mean, at some point, these are
not negotiated locally. Those benefits are not determined locally.
I'm talking about the weights, the wages and the rates of pay, because those things are all related.
Yes, they are related, right.
So I mean, is that going to be part of the conversation? At some point, these things are unaffordable to the citizens.
It is always part of the conversation. Every contract negotiation, those are part of the conversation. As you may or may not know, in Illinois, those contract discussions are typically happen within a pretty narrow set of boundaries. It's quite the web, but they're always part of the conversation. We are always trying to find a way. In fact, we just got a bunch of help most recently from our firefighters in that very sense. They agreed to a contract that is as good a contract as you're going to find around. And not only that, but they tried to give us some breathing room for 2021, specifically in the pay increases that are largely backloaded, so we could see what's going to actually happen next year. There's never a contract negotiation that doesn't include that conversation, but the back-end pension requirement that you're talking about is beyond our control.
Yeah, I mean, that part I understand, but obviously the front side of that can be controlled by the village 100%.
Yeah, I'm going to sound like probably I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I'm complaining on the one side about pensions, but on the other side, as Mike Baker said, if you work the math, it's an easy conversation. At some point, it's unaffordable for citizens, right? It's an easy conversation. The flip side of that, though, is start breaking down that dollar bill that Mike showed on the screen. Most people pay about $1.50 a day for police, fire, public works. That's a deal. It doesn't feel like it because it's a big tax increase, but you're looking at less than 10% that you're actually paying to your village. So 70% of that bill that you pay that feels painful every month, and it is, or every 6 months, 70% of that is other entities, typically schools, for your 3 kids. So we are trying very hard at every opportunity to keep costs down. And on an operational standpoint, the evidence is we are. I mean, whether it's headcount, pay rates, pay increases, or non-personnel operational costs, at every step along the way we are. It's just the pension element that's...
Yeah, I mean, you can't cut your way out of this. this mess. You just can't. 75 people or whatever you guys cut over the last 10 years, you can't, as you can see, you can't cut it. The other thing that is in the long-term plan here, I see a lot of opportunities for revenue enhancement or tax increases. And so that's, again, of particular concern. I think there was some noise when the food and beverage tax first went into play, and then now you're talking about raising it. I'm seeing some rates as to compare to other villages that are obviously significantly higher, I think up to 3% for some of them. So other than tax increases, what other avenues are you guys looking at to bring in revenues, like redevelopment of the 75th Street Mall and all that kind of stuff, bringing in people that are bringing in new revenues rather than just raising the existing rates?
All of those. Dave mentioned our Economic Development Corporation. There is an entity in town who works very hard at that. They work on attraction and retention of businesses and redevelopment opportunities such as 75th Street. That's probably a conversation, again, which I'd be happy to have, but is way longer than we're going to have right this moment. We spend a lot of time and energy on every one of those things. And if you look through the last, 5 or 6 years, you can find on our website the various state, I think they're kind of state of the village addresses that are out there. And you'll see all of those things that are happening on a regular basis. I mean, you could start ripping them off right now if I had my mind with me. But it's a constant effort to do exactly what you're talking about, encourage development, redevelopment, and investment in our community for that very reason. It absolutely helps share that burden. As Commissioner Jose mentioned, though, earlier, all those tax increases that you're seeing are opportunities for them, whether they're food and beverage taxes or sales taxes or motor fuel taxes. Those, one thing we have tried to do in an effort to keep citizens in their homes is put taxes on the places where they're at least to some degree discretionary. Doesn't feel great, but if we can stay a value in DuPage County and have it mostly discretionary while at the same time running a lean organization, we feel like we're doing a pretty good job.
And I'll add to that, Mayor, if I could. Online sales tax law changes should benefit the village. These are changes in state law that would collect sales tax for online purchases and then redistribute them back on the point of the actual sale, the purchase here in Downers Grove. We think that could significantly provide additional revenue, and it's really a redistribution of taxes that are already been paid to the benefit of the village of Downers Grove. It was supposed to be in place by July of this year due to the pandemic and then other issues. The state pushed the effective date to January 1st, 2021. So we did not count on any of those dollars like we didn't last year and then see what happens. So we're also hopeful that that change in state law will have a benefit to our residents, keeping our money local. The other thing is the change in a federal program that provides funding to help defray the costs and cover the cost of emergency medical services. And we started this year, and by next year, some of those dollars should be flowing to us as well. So 2 smaller items, but working at the issues you brought up.
Last one for you guys is this normally what it looks like when you guys are here? Or is this a COVID thing?
It's really pretty COVID. It's normally probably more like 10 to 15. You're seeing COVID.
Still pretty light, though.
Pretty light, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, guys.
Could we get your name for the record?
Yeah, Mike Smetana.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience on the budget?
I have a couple of comments, if I may.
All right, we'll go back to our, we're coming back. Item 4, the public hearing, is a return to council questions or comments. So, Rich, please.
I just wanted to point a couple of things out related to Mike's comments. Our arbitration situation is somewhat interesting and different than most people would think. That we work with our union, our organization, our firefighters, our public works, and our police, and you would think, well, we'll go in with a real low ball number, they'll come in with a high ball number, and if we can't reach agreement, we'll go to an arbitrator and they'll split the difference. That's not the way it works in this state. The way it does work is we try to do everything we can to work out those things without going to arbitration, because the arbitrator will pick their number or they'll pick our number. So it's really incumbent upon each side to be responsible and thoughtful. And to add to the mayor's comments about firefighters, they really did cooperate with us in time of need. The other comment I'd like to make, because it gets a lot of attention, about 75th Street and Lamont Road, is the village does not own that property. That property is completely owned by 2 property owners who are having some difficulty getting together. And as long as the place is not in disrepair, all we can do is continue to cajole and try to convince them to work together, because that would be a delightful place. So our hands are really somewhat tied. It's not really a lack of action on behalf of the village that's keeping that spot open.
Greg, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Picking up on Commissioner Cullivaney's last point, the Grove Shopping Center has been a significant focus for the EDC over the last, I'd say, probably 3 years or so. A lot of time has been spent on it. The two property owners used to be 14 or 15, if memory serves. So the situation has gotten somewhat better, and then COVID. So like a lot of things, it got put on hold. Touching on the pension issue again, it's, as Commissioner Cullivaney pointed out, the arbitration situation makes things a little bit interesting. But I want to highlight, and I've been a broken record on this, the pension obligations that we have for whether it's police, fire, public works, or the remainder of our staff. Those benefits are earned. We don't gift anything to them. They work hard for their benefits. In addition to the contributions going up, and of course the mayor's right, the Springfield controls what the benefit really is. We don't. But there are also other things that Springfield controls, like the mortality tables that have weighed into some of the changes that you've seen in the contribution rate going up. And on top of that, our local police and fire pension boards have made some decisions to reduce the rates of return that are expected in the marketplace, which has the effect of lowering the percentage funding that you're going to see. But the benefit to that is it makes it easier to hit those targets in the future. So it makes the fund more sustainable in the long term, which will make things easier into the future. So the pension fund is all of the pension funds are complicated things, but and it may not always show here on the graph, but we are slowly but surely moving in the right direction. Thank you, Mayor.
You, Greg? Nicole, please.
I just want to quickly piggyback. Several of us up here have children the same ages as yours. And so your concerns are very similar to many of us up here. We are also residents. We also love this town and want to make sure we stay here. So staff does an excellent job, and we try and do a good job up here of balancing so that we are able to make it work. And we will continue to do that for our children and for your children. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I want to just say to everybody watching at home and here that the presentation you saw from Mike Baker is available online and is a great starting point. We are going to continue to talk about this 2 or 3 more times before we settle anything. But if it seems like, why isn't somebody up here going through this thing line by line? It's because we really have. The Village of Downers Grove operates a process of long-range planning, which ends up feeding a budget process. It takes typically 2 or 3 months, and there are a lot of conversations. In this year, because of the COVID situation, frankly, we've had even more conversations at an earlier point about financial things. And that model, or that recent experience, people should expect will continue into next year. Those COVID financial response reports will continue, and we will make adjustments as necessary. This is, as Dave said, our very best guess, and that's what it is. It's based on some of the things you heard mentioned earlier, all of which are really truly unknowns. We will continue to do our very best to provide the services people expect at the lowest possible cost in a very lean and effective manner. But at the end of the day, I want to remind everybody too, your village doesn't operate deficit budgets, and we are a service delivery organization. And so we are people. And people, if you are just one person, you are probably going to cost more in 5 years than you did 5 years ago. And so one of our challenges is to try and find out how to get there through a variety of things beyond property taxes. As Dave mentioned, 70%, 7 cents out of, or 70 cents out of the dollar of operating this village is not coming from your property taxes. And that's pretty impressive. I don't know what it'll be next year, but I think last year or the year before, we were the lowest corporate tax rate in DuPage County. That's kind of our goal. Whether we're the lowest or the bottom third, what we're trying to do is be a good value to our residents. and I think we do a heck of a job with that, and I'm appreciative of staff's effort and all of our employees' effort to that very end. So with that, I will seek a motion to adjourn this public hearing.
Move to adjourn the public hearing.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
This public hearing on the budget is adjourned. We'll continue with the balance of our meeting. Takes us to our consent agenda, item 6. Is there a motion concerning consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any council questions or comments on the consent agenda? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Item 7 is our active agenda. That's a point in our meeting where we are going to take new subjects and act on them this evening. We do not have any active agenda items, which will take us to our first reading. This is the part of the meeting where we discuss or begin discussing new subjects. We will not be taking any action on these items tonight. With that, I'll hand it over to Village Manager Dave Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. We have only one item on tonight's first reading agenda. It's authorizing a special use for an additional theater at 5201 Highland Avenue. And here to present this item is not our Community Development Director, Stan Popovich, but it is our Planning Manager, Jason Zawilli.
Good evening. Thank you, Manager Fieldman. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. As Manager Fieldman noted, the applicant is requesting a special use approval for an additional theater at 5201 Highland Avenue, home of the Tivoli, located here in downtown, an Aerial, and of course the Tivoli, as we all know. The applicant is proposing to add one additional 32-seat theater, depicted in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, in a currently vacant retail space located west of the main entrance. The existing entrance and windows featured in the picture will be removed and replaced to offer the appearance of a storefront similar to the facades along Warren. At their October 26th meeting, Plan Commission recommended approval of the special use with the stated conditions, finding that the case met all the standards of a special use. The proposal was also reviewed in light of the comprehensive plan, which designates the subject property as part of the key focus area downtown. The additional theater addresses such recommendations as promotion of a variety of uses to facilitate the economic vitality of the downtown, utilization of attractive display windows that maintain visual interest and generate foot traffic, and then a coordination of key features as noted on the slide. While minimal improvements will be made to the facade in order to maintain the historic integrity of the theater, the design guidelines were also reviewed in light of the case. The original stone and materials around the existing storefront will be maintained, and the existing entrance and windows, as I mentioned, will be removed and replaced with a new storefronts and a continuation of the knee wall that exists on the facade, which will provide, again, interest and activity on the streets. I was told to keep this short and sweet, so that actually does end my presentation. Chris Johnson is here, the applicants, if there's any questions for them too.
Thank you, Jason. Any council questions or comments?
You want to start on the left this time?
Sure. Kavanaugh, you got anything?
You know, real quick, I think just to see the activity of the Tivoli going forward in times like this, when you think about the shutdowns across the country, the pivots that theaters have had to make to know that if there's action, if there's movement in that direction, is just a good sign. You know, it's a great thing to see the Tivoli positioning for what's to come, and so I appreciate the efforts and what's being done by the organization. So thank you.
I just want to say thank you to the Johnson family. They've been great partners, great local partners, the best we could ever hope for, and the Tivoli is a delight, and I hope to go see a movie as soon as the governor lets us. So thank you very much for continuing to invest in our town. We appreciate it.
To call the Tivoli a staple of our downtown is a dramatic understatement. So this additional investment is more than welcome. We truly appreciate it, and we wish you all the best with the construction and great business. Thank you, Mayor.
Rich.
On Christmas Day, that building will turn 92 years old, and it was the second theater in the United States to have talking movies, and just a delightful part of literally so many generations. So really pleased with the Johnson family and their original investment to buy the theater, which was totally unplanned because that was not the business you were in, but you learned really quickly. And the renovation, the $2 million renovation you did some 10, 15 years ago, if memory serves, and now this additional investment. So thank you for all the joy you've brought to Downers Grove for so many years.
Leslie?
Yep, just echoing that we appreciate the value that it's to the community, and also appreciation that we don't have to, that we're able to work out a scenario where we don't have to worry about parking and impacts on the residential community in the area in the midst of COVID. So it was just a really thoughtful plan put forward, and I really hope that it continues to make the Tivoli sustainable in the future.
Thank you so much for continuing to invest here. I can't imagine our town without the Tivoli active and running, and I keep thinking if this were here now, my yearly tradition of seeing It's a Wonderful Life at the Tivoli might have been able to happen, but I'm really excited that you guys are doing this, and I hope that it will help during these COVID times as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Chris, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Just thank you. Really appreciate it.
I won't repeat everything, but thank you. We're glad to be working with you.
That ends our
Okay.
first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Are there any council questions from the audience on this subject before we move on? Okay. That takes us to item 9, our manager report.
Thank you. One item on the agenda, which we'll get here in 1 second. Earlier tonight, we were talking about the budget, and the council and others properly thanked many members of our team, including the Firefighters Union. I'd like to also extend our thanks to Local 150, which is our public works union. They also contributed in a very meaningful way. And our police union have negotiations coming up here very shortly, and I suspect that we'll be in a position to thank them as well in the coming months as we work through that. Also wanted to thank key members of our budget team, Mr. Baker, obviously the presenter, Judy Butney, our finance director, Carol Hogan, Robin Leahy, and Dan Carlson really stepped up, as he always does, and did a tremendous job. All of the visuals you see here that make our numbers understandable. Thanks to Dan. Thanks to everybody on that team. Okay, on the stated agenda is a consideration of a report from the Human Services Ad Hoc Committee, and Mr. Baker has hooked me up here. Thank you, Mike. I am presenting the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee's report to the Village Council tonight. It's my pleasure to do so. This presentation consists of 3 sections. First, background information about the Ad Hoc Committee and their tasks. Second, the committee's review of the social services that are being provided in and around the village. And finally, the committee's recommendations and priorities. The Human Service Ad Hoc Committee was created in late 2018. The Village Council directed the committee to consider 2 key questions, basically focusing on what role should the Human Services Commission play and how can they help the Village Council and village staff. In 2019, the committee presented a report to the Village Council. The Council considered it and thought that it would be best to reconvene the committee and requested that they develop more specific recommendations and that they prioritize these recommendations after having considered presentations by organizations which currently provide social services in and around our village. The first step was the review of those services. The committee considered presentations by the 8 organizations you see here on the slide, and I can say that as the staff liaison to this committee, we all learned a bunch of some great work going on throughout our community and throughout the county. The committee found that social services are indeed provided and they are available, but there is a general lack of awareness of these valuable services. So based on those 2 key findings, the committee then recommended that the village increase awareness of these services and connect service providers to individuals in need of those services. And they recommended that the village hire qualified staff not to provide these services directly, but to act as referral services, connecting people in need to the agencies that already provide these services. And if you look in the report, they used a term called concierge, which I think captures it very nicely. The committee then went to work on developing further recommendations, or putting more meat on the bone, if you will, on the recommendations that appeared in the 2019 report and putting them in a priority order. They used the 2019 report as the basis, and they identified top, high, and medium priorities. The top priorities include, as you see here on the screen, that the Human Services Commission should advise the village and review village actions related to social services. They should advocate for providing services and address any gaps in social services. They recommended that social services be included in our long-range planning process and our budgeting process, and that resources be allocated to those services as part of those processes. They also recommended that we should be working to become a community of inclusiveness. The committee also identified these for high priority, focusing on diversity and inclusion efforts. The recommendation regarding hiring professional staff to connect residents to services actually shows up in this priority level as a high priority. Finally, the committee identified these 4 medium priorities, focusing primarily on how the Human Service Commission should operate and engage with the public. That is a very brief overview of a very thoughtful and well-done report. I wanted to thank all the Human Service Ad Hoc Committee members, many of whom who worked on both legs of this project back in 2019 and 2020. I think this report addresses the questions and directions provided by Council, and I do expect that this report will be considered over time and in conjunction with the budget and as we move forward with other high priority action items. With that, we're happy to answer any questions that the Council may have.
Thanks, Dave. We'll have to digest this, and everybody will have to spend a little time on it, figure out over the next few weeks whether there's any impacts to future budgets or immediate budgets in front of us, and we'll have to do, we got a lot of thinking to do and a lot of discussion to do. I just wanted to mention these folks by name. We have, over the years, taken opportunities to have ad hoc committees on a variety of subjects. Some folks may remember things like TCD. That's not exactly the same, but the point is we have a long history of engaging residents and trying to draw input from a variety of folks. In this case, Samantha Aycock, Rebecca Campbell, Tom Connolly, Chris Gilmartin, Azizi Marshall, Kimberly Nagy, and Stephanie Williams really provided a service to their community. It is not an easy thing to do, to find a way to take from your time, your personal time, meet with others in your community, talk about subjects that are sometimes difficult, sometimes fuzzy, sometimes uncomfortable, and have the result be a report that the village council can consider and potentially drive either policy or staffing or whatever with. It's a big deal, and we really appreciate their work on that, so thank you to all of them. Anybody got a comment for this evening? We'll start on the right this time.
Leslie first. She had her hand up first.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I want to make sure that we don't see this committee's work become a checkbox. It felt a little bit that way before we extended this work, and I value what we've learned over this last year, this extension. I do want to say, while I don't see the role of our councils and committees changing, as was suggested in some of the report in the near future, we're likely not to put a council or committee in charge because historically it's just not how we've used them. I do hope that we as a council and a village take their priorities seriously. I know I personally would like to see a social worker on staff. I've talked about it in some of these meetings before. And I really hope we can allocate some resources, and if nothing else, at least some thought, to addressing ways in which we can promote inclusivity and diversity in our leadership and within the village. So thank you to the ad hoc committee members, past and present. I appreciate this, and I hope this is an ongoing conversation.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I have a few comments. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee. This was a really impressive piece of work, really drilling in and finding out what resources were available from the village, from the county, from the township, from non-for-profits, and putting that all together. It's literally overwhelming, and the people in this dais are pretty well informed, and I think all of us were quite surprised at the sheer breadth and depth of that. We are typically an organization that is made up primarily of people. I think 80% of our budget is based on people, but we usually work on things. to a certain extent, like water mains and streets and things like that. And obviously, our first responders are working with people. So, I kind of like the idea of having someone as an ombudsman that could direct people, because if we are appeared somewhat overwhelmed by all of this, how does someone in our 49,275 people out there know where these things are? There's no way we could repeat these services on our own, but just to start to drill down as to, okay, based on their understanding of being a social worker, what are the right agencies? So I'm definitely open to that idea. And then the other thing is, what kind of volunteer work can be done? We've got a lot of wonderful volunteer organizations. The Rotary, for instance, putting on Grow Fest. I would think there are probably hundreds or thousands of man-hours of volunteer work. There are places like the Historical Society, Organic Gardeners, you name it, groups that are doing wonderful things for the village at no cost to the village. So, if we can get these people who are passionate about this engaged in that regard, then we should consider it.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Sure, Mayor, real quick. I think when I first saw, or kind of was first introduced to the ad hoc committee, one of my concerns was a concern that I just heard Leslie mention, was that I felt like it went by way too fast. I felt like it was something that kind of got relegated to the side, and I appreciate what the members of this committee has done. They took directions that kind of felt like in real time, in the moment, that we threw at them. They went back. They've delivered something to us that we can better tangibly put our hands on. And so some of the things that I'm looking forward to seeing as we begin to talk this through is, how do you manage this massive flow of information and resources? Whenever you have something the size of DuPage or even our village, you have so many fragmented resources, and for a lot of individuals, it's overwhelming. And so how do we continue to bring that information in a different way and better communicate those resources out? I'm interested in this idea, this concept of improving the diversity conversation among individuals of the village. How do we better leverage the individuals? I think I have it listed here as leveraging the community volunteer network. How do we harness all these great resources, all this talent, all this education, to continue to help move these resources in a way that better serves and helps our residents? And then two of the items that are intertwined in this conversation are, what does this possible management analyst to social work position look like? And then what does the inclusion, diversity, and equity conversation or report look like, and how does that all fold in? And so I'm just interested in really diving into those conversations and seeing how we better use our resource of the ad hoc committee to better serve our residents. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I greatly appreciate the people that sat on this committee, many of them, again, for the second time. The one thing I love about our community is how passionate and engaged our residents are. This report was 138 pages. Now, granted, some of that was information provided by staff, but it just kind of goes to show you how thorough this was and how much time and effort was really put in by these committee members, which I thought was incredible. This has always been something that I hoped we could bring back. I think there is a need and a want in our community to have an active human services committee. Their key findings I totally agreed with. And their priorities, there were about 14 total priorities which were ranked. Some of them that I really appreciated was HSC advocating for providing social services, identifying and addressing gaps in social services, community inclusiveness, ambassadors of diversity, promoting diversity events. I definitely thought that there were some things in here that are feasible and possible, and engaging directly with people in need. Another thing that I found interesting was the amount of services that are also already provided in our village, and I guess my hope would be that this group would be able to work with all these other groups. The library has 14 human service, things that they provide. The county, there's a list of 36 different resources on things that the county provides that help our residents. So again, really appreciated this report. I would love to have more information on the social work role. A lot of people know in my day job, it is myself and a social worker in my program. So I understand how important a social worker is. Sometimes I have to play a social worker at work when our real social worker isn't available. So I understand the importance of that role. However, when we talk about the community and tax dollars and all of these things, we are potentially missing out on bringing back a management analyst role. And so I'd like to see what the responsibilities of each role would be. Are there other local municipalities that utilize social workers, and how do they utilize social workers? Just for a more in-depth perspective on what we're looking at and how to best make a decision on that front. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the thanks to the folks that served on the Human Service Committee. It's the passion and commitment for the topic and for the community really comes through in all the various recommendations and throughout the report. I share the concern that was expressed earlier, I forget by exactly whom, with regard to the structure of our committees, boards and commissions, and how they kind of interact and interface with the village council. Some of the recommendations are non-starters with me, just based on the idea that boards and commissions are typically taking direction, taking information, giving recommendations to us, as opposed to driving an agenda. And I think we should be careful to respect that particular structure. The idea of a watchdog, I think, is unnecessary. We've got 49,000 of them. And accountability, in my mind, is a very important thing. The voters hold us accountable up here, 3 to 4 of us every 2 years. And I think it's important that the ultimate decisions be made on this dais. With all of that said, there's a lot of great information in here in terms of things that we can move forward with, conversations with the community, fleshing out the social worker role. And I was particularly interested in the diversity and inclusion and economic development role, and how we can really put some meat on those bones and work with the EDC and figure out the best way forward there. So I think there's a lot of great information here, and I look forward to digesting it further and discussing it over the period of the next few months. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else? All right. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. That ends our manager's report tonight, Mayor.
Item 10 on our agenda tonight is the attorney's report. Ms. Paterka.
Thank you, Mayor. Only one item to present tonight, and that is an ordinance authorizing a special use for approval of an additional theater within an existing building located at 5201 Highland Avenue, and it will appear on next week's active agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Before we get into mayor and council member reports, where's Mike? Mike, did we get anything in online through the course of the meeting?
We have not. No reports tonight, Mayor.
Okay, thanks for checking that. Item 11 on our agenda tonight are mayor and council member reports. This is an opportunity for council members to discuss things that are on their mind that might not be on the agenda, or goings on in the community that they're engaged in and want others to know about. So we'll start on my left so that we can ignore Rich for a little while longer.
Thank you, Mayor. My topic tonight, or just what I want to talk about, is before I left the house today, I was looking through text messages, and 3 text messages caught my attention. I think messages of some kind. One was on social, a couple on text, but one of them simply said, "Kavanaugh, could you please pray for me? My wife and I both have COVID." And as I looked through other messages, another message said, "I am dealing with COVID." And another message after that spoke to the same subject. It is mind-boggling to me at this point to watch the numbers. I don't know how best to describe it. I think the thing that kind of caught my attention the most as I looked through these messages trying to wrap my head around the numbers that we're seeing and the steps backwards that we are taking. It's, if I have to be honest, it's a little disheartening. Maybe it's a lot of disheartening. There was a ICU nurse, right before I clicked the TV off and headed in today, an ICU nurse named Agnes Boisworth said, if I can do CPR on a dying COVID person while I wear a mask, you can probably wear a mask when you walk around the store. And that was kind of the last message I got before I left the house. And it left me wondering, where does personal liberties begin or end, and where does selfishness pick up? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Kevin. Marge?
Kind of tailing off on that note, when we're talking about masks, I do have a problem with asthma, and interestingly enough, there are some masks that are more difficult to breathe through and some are easier to breathe through. So I encourage you to keep yourself safe, and if you find yourself struggling with wearing a mask, try a different one. Try a couple of different ones, because each one, whether it's got a filter on the inside or not, or it's just a couple of layers of cloth, it's still better than nothing. And we really want to keep all of our residents safe, and we hope that also, if you're in your house, I saw this play out in the last month where someone I know had a child come home with COVID, and the rate that it took a toll on the family, or didn't, still kept the wage earners of the family home from work and working from home for very close to a month. And so that's not something you think of off the bat. If it's not maybe if you get it, it's maybe if the kids get it, and then they pass it around the house, and then you get it in a domino effect, and it keeps everybody away from the office, away from doing what they want to do or what they need to do. So maybe it's time to think about an alternative plan in case in case something happens and you can't be the one going out to the store, or you can't be the one doing whatever you normally do. Have a emergency plan of action, and please try to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the sentiments about wearing a mask and the seriousness of all of it. COVID sounds like it's touching friends of everybody. It's touched family members. It's touched coworkers. I know I've seen it in my own extended family and my coworkers and friends. So please continue to take it seriously and do what you can to keep yourselves safe, keep your family safe, and all of those around you. While you're doing that, please remember that if you decide to not cook dinner or lunch or breakfast on a particular day, there are a lot of restaurants and other establishments and downers that would love your business. They can't seat you indoors right now, but there's plenty of opportunities for takeout, for outdoor dining when the weather isn't like it was tonight. But please remember that lots of dining options here in Downers, and keep those struggling businesses in mind. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Rich?
Yeah, I just like to echo those comments, and my feeling about this is that we have businesses that are necessary to the survival of Downers Grove and necessary to the survival of the owners who invested in those restaurants and the people who work there. And, we're not going to have 76-degree weather through December, January, and February, and it's going to be tough for them. So if we can all do our individual part to help bring the numbers down to create a situation where they could reopen, that's I think the real motivation that has a direct impact on the financial aspects of this village and those very important businesses, let alone the human toll that it brings. So we just have to get a little bit more used to these things. I happen to wear one of these at work all day. It doesn't particularly bother me. So we just have to, kind of all work together in this thing.
Thanks, Rich. Leslie?
Yep, just going to echo that, and The way we get back to normal and reopen our businesses and restaurants is not by bucking orders. It's by being responsible for public health. It's wearing a mask, socially distancing, and washing our hands frequently. We know that our numbers have been going up, both our positivity rate and our hospitalization rate due to COVID. And we do not want to see that continue to rise as the weather changes. So please be safe, be kind, think of the public health implications, and that is the way that we're going to be able to reopen, is if we get those numbers down.
Cool.
I don't want to be redundant, but I'm going to be. Please wear a mask. Most of you with children are probably now seeing your kids start to e-learn at home the entire day coming up in the next couple days here, including the students in my building. We were just informed at 2 o'clock this afternoon that we were going full remote starting on Thursday. I've got students who we were able to bring back 4 days a week who really needed it and who were really starting to do better, and now they're going back home. And it's incredibly frustrating as a parent and as a teacher. So please wear your mask out in public. Please socially distance, and do all of the things that they are recommending, because they're really not incredibly difficult. I'm going to end on a light note, though, which is good. Handmade ornaments are needed to decorate our downtown holiday tree. I might have cried a little when I realized that we were not going to have the typical Christmas ceremony, and I know that there are probably many residents out there disappointed in that. But you can still be engaged in the festivities, if you will, by making an ornament. So ornaments need to be at least 8 inches in diameter and made of weatherproof material. Please, no sharp edges, pointy ends, or heavy materials. And string or twine for hanging should be looped and 10 to 12 inches long. Your ornaments will not be returned, so if you feel like this is not something that you would recycle with the many papers that your child brings home every day, take a photo and you can keep it that way. Deliver ornaments with the form that you can find on events.downers.us to our Public Works building at 5101 Walnut Avenue by Friday, November 20th. That is all, Mayor.
Thank you. I had a couple of comments that I want to make, and so I actually prepared something. So if you'll just bear with me here. It's going to be COVID, but it might be a slightly different angle, if you will. With the governor's most recent orders, I thought it was important to talk COVID a little bit tonight, as all my colleagues have. It's certainly on everybody's mind. Just because you're tired, COVID doesn't care. COVID's not over. We're all tired. But this crisis is going to be with us for a long time. And when I say that, I think it's important that we start talking about it in the right way. Like, think years, not months. You may recall several months ago, 6 months ago, where we thought it was a couple of weeks, and then we thought it was a month or so. There's some realities here, guys. And no matter how tired or frustrated we are, our world's going to be COVID for a while. I've got 3 kids at home. I understand the disappointment Nicole referred to. Those schools, proms, college searches, freshman adventures, youth sports, the college experience, all foiled by COVID. I recognize the confusion and the frustration brought about by differences in direction, whether it's the governor's office, IDPH, IHSA, public versus private schools, state to state. Many of us have relatives in other states or friends and colleagues in other states that are operating differently. But I'm sure that whether your kid's school is run by the Board of Education, the diocese, a local private board in Illinois or out of Illinois, none of those folks are trying to make kids fail. Every one of those groups cares deeply about the health and safety of our children. From volunteer board members to administrators and teachers, they want our kids to succeed. And like each of us, they have different thresholds for risk, different groups they answer to, different inputs for data. I understand, too, the challenges of owning a business. Greg talked about trying to help our local businesses. Rich mentioned it as well. It's super important, it really is. The personal risk and the all-in approach of being a small business owner. It's terrifying to stare at the ceiling all night, wonder how you're going to make payroll. It's not just your family, but it's often many others that are counting on you. And as much as you don't want to fail, you don't want to let your community down, You don't want to risk the safety of your employees or your customers. The stress of having your name on the line for every decision is immense. It really is, guys. We've talked a lot over the last year about privilege. The privilege of being a middle-aged white male like me is obvious to many. It's a real issue. But other privileges are no joke either. When your family's able to make a smooth transition to work from home, sometimes smooth or less smooth, like Marge talked about, or hang at a vacation house or hire a nanny, it's easy to expect others to do the same thing. When you're retired and your kids are grown and out of the house, your perspective on risk might be a little different than a single parent who has to go to work to make rent payments. Those seniors that are freaking out because they don't know if they're going to get to see their family again, maybe ever, think about their days and how long those have to be. For each of us that's getting by just fine, there's another one who's about to break, a friend or a neighbor or a relative. We've got to keep it together, folks, for our kids and our community and for our own well-being. As mad as you may be at the current situation, at the governor, at the president, don't let it define your relationship with your school or each other. As much as you may love a local business or personally be at risk for COVID, don't let that ruin your relationship you have with your community. Your neighbors, your friends, your family, they will make different choices than you. Organizations will make different choices than the one you're part of. They're making the choices they think are best. They just will. We do it every day on a million subjects. We've got to not let that be the thing that makes us all angry with each other or divides us. Because when COVID is behind us, God willing, we'll still be here together. Let's choose to be glad we have each other. So as the state amps up mitigation efforts, I'm once again asking you to mind the 3 W's, because only a fool doesn't wear a seatbelt. And as numbers we all watch move in the wrong direction right before the holiday season, I'm asking you to minimize your social gatherings. Because again, only a fool fails to recognize the inherent danger of an airborne virus. You don't have to be an epidemiologist or the director of the CDC or a nurse to understand the risk. But what I'm asking for more than anything is grace. I'm asking you to choose to extend grace to each other. I'm asking you to get over yourself and accept that your needs and resources are not the same as everybody else's. The privilege takes many forms and should be a source of humility and service, not scrutiny and condemnation. I'm asking you to recognize we're all humans with unique hopes and fears. When you see someone do or say something that doesn't sit quite right with you, step back and breathe. Back off a little on social media. Choose silence a little more often. It's often said we never really know what someone else is going through. But in the midst of the COVID pandemic, it's a pretty safe bet that whatever it is not what they'd hoped or planned. So I've said for quite some time, just a minute ago, but you've heard it in the past, that we're going to have to learn to live with COVID. We are, for a long time. And I'm convinced that remains true, but more than anything, I think it includes learning to live with grace for each other. This is a great community that we're all part of. Let's all make sure we recognize that we want to be part of it with each other 2 years from now. So with that, thank you for the time. Appreciate your indulgence. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.